incontrovertible evidence for the existence of God right here in the DNA. Like we were talking about the cosmological argument, the teleological argument. This is an offshoot of the teleological argument. So let's say you're walking along a deserted island, okay? And you're, as far as you know, you're the only one there. All of a sudden, you see a book on the beach, okay? You see a book there. What's your conclusion going to be? I'm not alone.
Who wrote it?
Yeah, who wrote it? I'm not alone, okay? What's the source of the book? And you're going to say there must be intelligence behind this book. Something here is outside of the ordinary. Now, why is that? Because logically what's going to happen is you in your head is going to process the fact that you see a book, and you're going to say a book has design, therefore it requires a designer. A book has information recorded, and it's an information system, and it requires intelligence. Information is not accidental, therefore it requires an author, okay? The same process, you can go back in time. So cuneiform. Cuneiform writing is one of the first known alphabets, okay? And the word cuneiform comes from cunis, which is the Latin word for wedge, okay? It's writing on the earliest forms of information system. So this is an example of cuneiform, okay? These wedge-shaped formations, and these are the words that are associated with these patterns that are formed by taking wet clay and making that wedge just the right way, and that wedge equals that information. So, and much of the knowledge that we have today of the ancient world is because we were able to break the cuneiform code, and now we can read the writings. We can read the writings of what was going on in the city of Nineveh, the city that's in the book of Jonah. We could read the writings of how the Assyrians attacked the city of Jerusalem. We could read the writings of what cities were conquered and the things and the trade and the goods that were being purchased, because we can actually read it, okay? So what is happening is that we're transmitting the system to our understanding. We're able to read what was going on in the system. So in the same way, software is a code, okay? It's an information system. What is software? It stores, it transmits, and it gives instructions. That's what software is. But what does software require? Software requires intelligence. And it requires an author, and it requires a designer for the software. Like someone had to design that software to equal this thought process to transmit it into the code. So it requires intelligence, and it requires an author, and it requires a designer. But it also requires systems. It requires hardware, and it requires storage systems that are going to hold that information. It requires a computer interface that can then be read by someone who's sitting on the outside. So it requires intelligence. Would anybody argue with that? Does anybody say, no, it can happen by accident. It's just a complete accident that this came about. No one, you would be laughed at if you said that. Okay? So, well, why is that important? Because look, here's letter A. Now, if you heard me ask this question before, don't answer, okay? But does anybody know where the letter A came from? Why do you guys use it all the time, right? Say, how many of here have asked themselves, where did that letter A come from? How did I get a letter A? The goat herders, okay? Well, you know there's a history behind each letter you use. So the word letter A translated is Aleph. But I want to show you another aspect of a letter A that most people never think about. Can anybody see the letter A in the ox? Each letter has corresponding. You're actually using an ancient pictograph system when you write. The letter D in Hebrew is dalet, means door. What's it look like? A door with hinges. Think about that. Resh, R. It's like a head with a neck. R, okay? Each letter has a corresponding origin. But yet we never think about it. We just use it. We assume it's always been. But there's actually a cause behind it. So in the same way, it's like our DNA. It's like who we are. We just say, it's here. But I'm going to show everybody the absolute proof for the existence of God. So let's say, for example, what signs is there life on Mars? that we send up explorers and we assume there's life on Mars. We're always looking for signs of life on Mars. What are we looking for? When we say, how do we find life on Mars? We send up a lander on Mars, and it's looking around. What's it looking for to prove there's life?
Water, protein.
Water,
Air.
protein. Why water?
Necessary for life.
Okay, water's necessary for life. What?
Air.
Air. Well, yeah, because it needs something to breathe. Okay, air type. From our perspective, that's what's necessary. Okay, so what?
Patterns and order.
Yes, we're looking for unique patterns, something that looks outside of the natural occurrence, okay? And we're going to take that as evidence that life exists. If a lander landed on Mars and it saw eyeglasses, okay, or a book or something like that, what do you think? What do you think the headline all over the world would be tomorrow? Life. I mean, yeah, life. We found life on Mars. Evidence. Why? Because now we found intelligence, okay? So if you find that book, the headline the next day is going to be Intelligent Life Found on Mars. And everybody's going, wow, I wonder if, and that's what we're kind of doing, because we're assuming, okay, that life could be there. Now, again, we're looking at life. So let's look at, I want everybody to understand how the DNA works, because a lot of times people don't understand the miracle that you are. You are a miracle all around you, okay? Your life is a miracle. Your life is 100% evidence for the existence of God. So let's look at DNA. DNA is a code. Now, give you some background. When Darwin first came up with his theory of evolution, they had a conception of how life was. Is that they actually believed that cells were just protoplasm, basically moldable, simple things, chemicals. They had no clue how complex life was. Darwin and his fellow atheists and compatriots in the 1800s had absolutely no clue on the complexity of life. So a lot of those theories were formed off of ignorance. So it's only lately when they found DNA and they found the complexity, and you'll see atheism is in a big problem right now. It's a big problem because you can't have the origin of life, because this is what's called, and we're going to talk more about that next week, but the chemical origin of life. Where did that first life come from, and how did it come to exist, and then how does that process work? But right now we want to talk about the coding. So DNA is a code. It's complex, okay? And it's a complex code design requires an intelligent designer. We looked at examples of software code, cuneiform code, our alphabet. All these are codes that are transmitting information and data. DNA is no different. So the DNA code is actually the exact equivalent of a written language. There's four chemical compounds in the DNA code. And we know written language requires an author, but we'll talk more about the author later. So let's kind of break down the code. So in every cell of your body, now some cells like your blood platelet cells or your blood cells, they don't have DNA in them. Okay, they only live 120 days and then they're done. Their usefulness is gone, so they don't have a DNA. But most of your other cells all have DNA in it, and that DNA for a human being is 46 chromosomes. It's the same in bacteria. Bacteria have DNA. Viruses have DNA. Everything that's alive has DNA in it. Okay. So in your human body, there's 2 meters of DNA. In each cell of your body, there's 2 meters of DNA. And what is that DNA? There's 3 billion DNA subunits. And these are the chemical compounds that make up, they go by the letters A, T, C, and G. So basically, just like software code is, what are the 2 components of software code? 1 and 0, 0, 1. Okay, from that, you have all the software that's processed. Well, the DNA is a 4-letter code, okay, of software. And what's the purpose of the DNA? The DNA gives the instructions, okay, on how to construct what's called proteins. So what's a protein? Like your nail and your hair are both made out of the protein keratin. So, and a rhino's horn is made out of keratin. So that same protein makes up a lot of building materials that are in living matter, okay? The protein keratin, okay? So the DNA has a subunit known as a gene that actually instructs the body how to make keratin. And that the instructions are in the letters A, T, C, G, these chemical compounds that make up the DNA. And the double helix, that's actually like, consider that like the paper that the ink is printed on. Because the double helix is basically the structure in which the code is encased in, and that the code is going to be transmitted for the next process. It's important to understand this process, because once you understand this process, you know that God exists, because it's impossible for God to not exist. I'm going to show you here in a second. So is everybody with me? There's 30,000 genes that are encoded in your DNA, and the DNA is giving instructions on how to make these 30,000 proteins that are used throughout your body. And there's different, like for example, the keratin makes up my hair and it makes up my nails. But why is it this form here and this form here? Because it's how it's folded, okay? The protein is folded. The body's also given instructions on how to fold it, okay? So deoxyribonucleic acid, okay? So it allows the cell to make copies, and this is the language. The adenine, the thymine, the cytosine, and the guanine, okay, is the cell language. It's not a language. It's not a metaphor of language. It's actually a language with actually rules and instructions how to make things. So what is it telling the body how to do? So our body, every protein that's in your body is made up of 20 amino acids. So if you work out, see people that work out, they get protein drinks, and they want to make sure that all these amino acids, so their body. So every cell, every protein in your body is made up of amino acids. And think of amino acids as like A to T, like the letters. And so what does it do? It constructs a chain of amino acids, and that the chain of amino acids make up that protein. So so let's look at, for example, the average chain of protein is 400 linked amino acids. So if you have 20 letters here, so the average word is going to be 400, combination of 400 of those 20 letters. Okay, so think about that. So the DNA is giving the instructions on how to construct the protein, which is made up of the 20 amino acids. It's giving the instructions. So the instructions on how to build the proteins are encoded in the DNA. That's what the gene is. So keratin, nails, hair, horns for goats. Okay, Rick? Key one for remembering goat herding. Goat herding 101. Okay. Goat herding 101. Okay. Keratin. Okay. So what happens is, so you have the DNA. So it's on that chain. So what it has to do is it has to be transcribed from the DNA to another unit called a ribosome. So we'll talk more about this next week, but the ribosome is actually a protein factory. And it then takes the transcription from the DNA, and it's going to make keratin. It's going to, just like a computer, it's going to go through the ribosome, it's going to assemble all the amino acids, and the product is going to be keratin, and then it's going to be folded, whether it's going to be for hair, or it's going to be for nails, or it's going to be for horns, okay? It's going to be folded, okay? And then the protein has to be transported to the place that it needs to be used, okay? So like the hair follicle will then transport it to the place that it needs to be used. So this is what a keratin protein would look like, okay? The combination. It's very complex. It's not simple. But just to get an understanding of the complexity, okay, we'll talk here in a second. So our body has over 30,000 proteins are encoded in your DNA. And again, that's just about in every cell of your body. A few cells of your body do not have DNA in them, okay? And one of those cells is your blood cells, and then your conical eye cells, because they would get in the way of the light, okay? Then there's 100 potential variations, okay? So let me just show you how the math works here. So let's say we have the word frog. So what's the odds of you getting the letter F?
1 in 26.
1 in 26, okay? So you have 26 options, okay? Well, pretty 1 in 26. What's the words of you getting FR? Well, it'd be 26 times 26, okay? 1 out of 676. What's the words to get FRO? It would be 1 out of 17,576. So if you have three 26-letter options, and in order for you to get partially frog, you would get every 17,576 times, you would get FRO. But to get the word frog, 4 letters, okay? Just to get 4 letters with 20 options, okay, 26 options, it's going to be 1 out of 456,976. That's how rare it's going to be to get a 4-letter word, just without any intelligence. Now, if you're there, okay, if Rick is there and Rick is the intelligence behind it, and Rick says, okay, there's the letter F, there's the letter R, there's the letter O, there's the letter G, frog, okay? There's where intelligence comes in. Without intelligence, again, there's no God, there's no intelligence. Therefore, how does that word come about? It's random mutation. This is the vehicle that atheism is based upon. So they believe that everything's through random mutation. There's no intelligence behind it. There's supernatural intelligence behind it. So now understand this. A protein is not alive. A protein is not alive. A protein is just the product of the construction of the instructions of the DNA. So the very first cell would not be one protein. The very first cell would be a combination of hundreds of proteins, okay? And not only would it be a combination of hundreds of proteins, but it would have to have the instructions on how to make those hundreds of proteins, because the very first cell would have to replicate itself to be another cell, right? You don't just have the very first cell. That very first cell has to replicate itself. So not only does it need the proteins, but it needs the instructions on how to make the proteins encoded in the DNA. So you have a bunch of steps, all right? So I just said, okay, AI, Google AI, what are the possibilities of having one protein, okay? One protein. I'm not even talking about life. I'm just talking about one protein. Average protein is a 400 chain amino acid, okay? So this is a Google AI, okay? I asked a question. If there are 20 amino acids and a protein chain is 400 amino acids, what are the odds of the correct protein forming by chance? No God. What are the odds? This is Google AI's answer. It says the probability of a specific 400 amino acid chain forming by chance from 20 amino acids is extremely low, practically 0. It's calculated as 1 to the 20th raised to the power of 400. So 1 to the 20th, 1 over 20 to the 400. This is an incredibly small number and highlights the role of biological mechanisms in the protein synthesis. Okay, you need a cause. So why is that important? Because that's not even life. That's just a protein, okay? Then you need to transmit the instructions on how to make that protein into the DNA, because the DNA is the one responsible for making that protein, or the power behind it. So this is very, very important, because basically you cannot have life without a cause of life, without an intelligence. It's absolutely impossible. So this is the cult of atheism, where it's to believe that came about by chance is absolutely, it's an implausible belief system. So there's more hurdles, and I'm just bringing up the very clear, logical, observable hurdles. There's even more than that, and this is a mathematical principle. Math proves the existence of God by the implausibility of the whole process. And again, it's a written language, just like we have 26 letters and words and sentences and paragraphs. The same works with the DNA. The cell has a language all its own, rules to govern. And again, logic proves this. And this is, I just want to, the real quick way of demonstrating to anybody who says, I'm an atheist. Well, you still have to say, well, where did life come from? And then you can use a letter like the frog, 1 out of 26 times 26. And then when you understand how complex a protein chain is, it's like, and that's not even life. That's just the building block of life that's generated by the DNA that's encoded. So someone had to encode the DNA to instruct on how to build that protein. You say, well, where did that come from? That intelligence is beyond anything that we have as an intelligence in our human capacity, writing books, writing cuneiform, and no one in the world, if a spacecraft landed on Mars and we had one of our robotic machines walking and they find a book, we'd say, whoa, we got life. But the DNA is much more complex than anything like that. But the same people who are looking for life on Mars will say, well, we have no proof for the existence of God. That's the blindness in the world that we live in. So there's absolute proof for the existence of God in the DNA cosmology. So again,